Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, difficult paradoxes in mental health: the strange, tangled up link between bipolar disorder and creativity. It's a story that seems to coil back on itself, twisting together really profound suffering with these flashes of absolute genius. And that brings us right to the heart of it. How can a condition that's defined by so much distress and dysfunction also be a possible source for some of our greatest creative achievements? It just doesn't seem to make sense, right? It feels like an impossible contradiction. But, as we're going to see, the search for an answer reveals something fundamental about both our brains and our society. So let's start with the hard reality: $36,000. That's the estimated annual cost per patient for bipolar disorder in the United States. And you gotta understand, that number isn't just about money. It represents a huge burden of dysfunction and really deep suffering for both patients and their families. This is the curse side of the equation. But then you have this: a list of some of the most brilliant creators, thinkers, and artists in history. Now, we can't go back and diagnose them, of course, but their life stories are just filled with this incredible emotional intensity, the highest highs and the lowest lows, that strongly suggests a connection to bipolar disorder. Their temperaments were, as one writer perfectly put it, touched with fire. And this is the so-called blessing side of the paradox. And look, this isn't just some interesting thing from the history books. The number of people diagnosed with bipolar disorder is actually rising around the world, especially among young people. That means this whole paradox we're exploring, this tension between cost and creativity, is happening right now, and it's shaping the potential of our future generations. So understanding it is more urgent than ever. All right, so how do we even begin to unpack this link scientifically? Is this connection just a matter of having the right or wrong genes, or is there something way more complex going on here? Let's take a look at the evidence. This brings us to some pretty hard data. A major study looked at creative professionals. We're talking artists, dancers, writers, and what they found was a 17% higher prevalence of the specific gene variants linked to a higher risk for bipolar disorder. That's a really compelling genetic link. It suggests the very same biology that can influence our moods might also help shape our most creative ideas. Now, this leads us to two different ways of looking at it. On one hand, you've got the genetic trait view. This is the idea that it's pretty deterministic. You have the genes for bipolar disorder, and so creativity is just a byproduct. It's that simple. But a more modern, holistic view sees it as a much more complex process, where creativity bubbles up from this dynamic mix of genes, your environment, your relationships, the whole shebang. And this is where that simple "it's all in the genes" idea really starts to fall apart. The story of Vincent van Gogh is the perfect example. When his illness was at its absolute worst, he was actually prevented from painting. He couldn't create. He could only work during his periods of recovery. And that tells us something incredibly important. Even if you have a genetic predisposition, the full-blown illness can be a barrier to creativity, not the source of it. Okay, so if it's not just about genes, how in the world do we make sense of this paradox? To do that, we need a new way of thinking about it. And this is where a really fascinating concept from the thinker Douglas Hofstadter comes into play. It's called the strange loop. So what is a strange loop? Well, Hofstadter uses it to describe these paradoxical feedback loops, where you move up or down through the levels of a system, say from an individual person's mind all the way up to society as a whole, and you somehow end up right back where you started. It's a way to explain how two things that seem opposite can actually be feeding each other. So how does this apply here? Conventional logic says bipolar disorder is bad. It causes suffering. It costs a lot of money. Simple. But the strange loop is what happens when, as the source material says, the absurd statement, bipolar disorder can be good for societies, fires back on conventional logic. Suddenly, the good and the bad aren't separate anymore. They're locked together in this bizarre feedback loop. And here's the loop in its simplest form. You have the bad aspects, like an individual's suffering. That can fuel the creation of good things, like amazing art or scientific breakthroughs that benefit all of us. But, and this is the key part, it doesn't stop there. Those good things can then feed back and actually help manage the bad.
They're locked in this continuous, creative conversation with each other. I know this might still sound a little abstract, so let's make it totally concrete. We're going to look at a couple of fascinating, real-world examples of this strange loop in action, taking us from the world of heavy metal all the way to the cutting edge of data science. Okay, check this out. This shows how the loop can work through art. It starts with a person trying to manage their negative emotions. That's the bad. They use art as an outlet, and that produces a good, the art itself, which we all might enjoy. But here's where the loop closes. The act of making the art is also therapeutic. That feeling gives them a tool, a benefit, that then feeds right back into helping them manage their condition. The good is actively helping the bad.
And this can get incredibly specific and honestly kind of cool. Get this. One study talked about how a person with bipolar disorder made these creative connections between the distinct symptoms of mania and depression and the unique sounds of different heavy metal subgenres. Now, this isn't just a fun little analogy. It's a whole new language to try and communicate the lived experience of the disorder.
All right, let's look at one more example. It's a technique called data sonification. The idea here is that you take cold, objective data, like, say, mood tracking information from an app on your phone, and you creatively translate it into an experience you can actually feel, like sound or music. And this is where that loop just closes in such a powerful way. The bad, the cold, hard data of your daily struggles, gets transformed into something good, a piece of music that is uniquely yours. Imagine listening to your own emotional journey, compressed into a song just a few minutes long. You could gain a totally new kind of insight into yourself. The data literally becomes a therapeutic tool. That is the strange loop in action. So, what does this all mean? What's the big takeaway? Well, thinking in terms of these strange loops points us toward a whole new way forward, one that actually embraces complexity instead of trying to simplify it away. And that could lead to much better outcomes for everyone.
This strange loop way of thinking, it actually has a name. It's called convergence mental health. It's a new paradigm, and it's built on the idea that you just can't understand a problem this complex by looking at it from only one angle. It demands that we tear down the walls between research, therapy, art, data science, and, critically, the lived experiences of patients themselves. So why does all this matter so much? Because this strange loop model, it finally helps us reconcile that curse versus blessing paradox. It moves us past that simplistic and often wrong "it's all in your genes" explanation. It places real, genuine value on the lived experiences of individuals. And maybe most importantly, it opens up brand new creative paths for therapy and helps us build a much more complete and, well, humane understanding of mental health.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to chew on. This model asks us all to shift our perspective. So, if we stop looking at bipolar disorder as only a curse that has to be eliminated, and instead see it as this incredibly complex process with both burdens and benefits, what other hidden potentials, what other strange loops might we discover?